Christian Rakos to continue his speech.
Okay. Can you maybe present the slides in presentation mode?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Welcome to everybody else. My name is Christian Rakos. I'm chairman of the World Bioenergy Association. Our association is an organization that is headquartered in Stockholm in Sweden, and we have members around the world, associations and industries alike, and we try to promote the use of bioenergy globally. Next slide, please. What we are, our main publication is the Global Bioenergy Statistics. We are publishing that every year, which shows the role of bioenergy on a global scale. Next slide, please. What you can see is that at the global scale, renewable energy still has a very small share of energy. It's only 15%. So we are looking really for a very big change to change this to become 100% at the end of the by 2050 or 2060, depending on the country. Next slide, please. So if you look at the renewable energy, what you can see is that 70% of all renewable energy that is being used globally is bioenergy. Bioenergy is much larger than all the others, which is why it will play a very important role in the future. Next slide, please. This is true on a global level, but even on a European level, which is a quite developed economy, you can see that bioenergy is the major part of renewable energy use. Next slide, please. So why is bioenergy so large? Well, first of all, there is a lot of biomass around in the world. The bioenergy can yield different types of fuels, both solid, liquid, and gaseous fuels. And there is a lot of interesting technology available in the meanwhile. In the last 2 or 3 decades, very big advances have been made in the technologies to use bioenergy. Bioenergy is also a low-cost option to store energy. Next slide. If you look at the global carbon flows, you can see that the human-induced carbon flows are actually smaller than the carbon flows that are initiated by plants. Plants take up very large amounts of carbon from the atmosphere, but they also emit to the atmosphere when they are breathing on the one side, but also when they are decaying, when they are rotting. If you now advance one more. So the rotting of biomass is generating 220 gigatons of carbon dioxide that is emerging from the biosphere every year into the air. And the idea of bioenergy is really, instead of letting biomass to rot, to decay, and to emit CO2, to use its energy content before that happens. And you can see that this is an enormous amount of carbon, really. It's a very large flow of carbon. So if we can even take a small part of this flow of carbon and utilize it, we could solve a lot of energy problems. Next slide, please. Yes, this is next one, please. Yeah, this just illustrates all the different possibilities to use bioenergy, either as a liquid fuel in power plants that can produce heat and power, for domestic heating, for biogas, but also for cooking. Next slide. This picture illustrates how efficient and how cost-effective energy storage in form of biomass is. On the right side, you can see my son, and he has a bowl of pellets. This has an energy content of 6.4 kilowatt hours, and it costs about 30 cents. On the left side, you can see an electric storage. It has the same amount of energy stored, but it costs
yeah, definitely more than bioenergy.
So this shows that it is a much more effective and cheap way to store energy than electric storages. Next one. I'm going to talk now shortly about a landmark report of the International Energy Agency, which has developed a net zero scenario, which is looking at how could a decarbonized global energy system look like. Next slide, please. What you can see is that in this scenario, the amount of bioenergy supply provided by biomass is going to continue very much. It will be actually doubling within the next 30 years. So biomass will play an important role in this transition to a sustainable energy future. One is remarkable that the International Energy Agency believes that the traditional use of biomass cooking for firewood use for cooking and for heating will be replaced by modern forms of bioenergy. So this is going to decline very quickly and be replaced by more efficient forms. And I'm going to talk about that later on. Next slide, please. One way of using bioenergy in a more efficient way is to improve its properties, mainly by drying and by compaction. And if you do that, you get pellets. And what you can see is that the global production of pellets has been increasing tremendously over the last 20 odd years, which means that this is becoming a more and more important way of upgrading biomass. Today, global pellet production is probably, well, if you include China, maybe 60 million tons that are already being produced and used in different ways. Next slide. They are being used in the Northern Hemisphere for heating, especially in Europe, but also in America, and starting now also in other countries such as Japan. Pellets are a very convenient fuel for heating stoves and boilers for domestic heating. Next.
Definitely.
Next. Next slide, please. They are also being used in large power plants that produce heat and power for cities. No, sorry, back. Back.
Yeah, yes.
Back, please. 2 slides back. One more back. Yes. This one in advance, please. This power plant here is supplying an entire large city, the city of Copenhagen, with heat and power, and it was completely converted from coal to using pellets. It's generating 500 megawatt and 250 megawatt of electricity is extremely efficient. So that is possible on a large scale. Next now. On a small scale, on a domestic scale, this is something I believe has a huge future, and that is the use of pellets for cooking. This is a cook stove that is using a gasifying principle. It burns without generating smoke at all. It's almost as clean burning as LPG or gas, but it is using pellets from agricultural residues, in this case from rice husks. This is a very promising technology. Next slide. It is promising because it has great health benefits. It does not create so much pollution in the house. It reduces the workload for women and children to collect firewood. Takes much less time for cooking, and it protects the forests, because currently there is a significant overuse of forests for the production of charcoal and firewood. This can be done really with pellets only from agricultural residues, from all kinds of residues. And if you think about how many people are still relying on traditional use of biomass, you can very easily calculate that we are talking about a potentially extremely large market and a very beneficial activity, which is why the World Bioenergy Association is looking particularly at this technology and tries to promote it and to spread the know-how on how to use biomass, advanced biomass cooking. Next slide, please. Next slide. What we are seeing right now is very unfortunate, and that is that there is a lot of campaigning of environmental organizations against bioenergy use. Much of this is supported by American foundations, and we are really wondering why these foundations are spending millions and millions of dollars to campaign against bioenergy. And one reason could be that bioenergy is the most important competitor to fossil fuels, but we have no proof of that. In fact, there is a lot of campaigning against bioenergy, especially in Europe right now, which we believe is very unfortunate. Next slide. Next slide, please. So we have on the one side, and one more back, sorry. We have on the one side a very big urgency to realize climate protection. We need to grow bioenergy use very fast. And on the other side, we are having a lot of opposition against it, and that makes policymakers confused, and is not very good. Next one. So one of the reasons for this fact is that the bioenergy sector is a very fragmented sector. There's many, many small businesses, but very few organizations that are actually supporting bioenergy and raising the voice for bioenergy use. And that is one of the reasons why the political influence to get a political support for bioenergy use is not very well developed. Next. So what are we doing as World Bioenergy Association? We try to actively engage with NGOs and start a fact-based debate, because very often arguments against bioenergy are not fact-based, they're basically fiction. We organize webinars, we engage in international organizations, we participate in the climate conferences and things like that, and we try to promote the use of modern bioenergy, both in the clean cooking field, but also in other fields. Next. That was it. I would appreciate if you consider to become a member of our association, and I hope there was something of interest in my presentation.